Hello, everybody. Welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name's Suj.
And my name is James.
No Premier League, James, which means Fantasy Premier League. So the world currently revolves around sitting in what might look like bomb shelters or whatever on YouTube, or if people are watching, but sitting far away from James. Our social distancing is now very much in play. We're probably about 2 miles apart. I think
and more.
That's probably a safe distance. Yeah, it's probably more, probably 5 miles apart. But yeah, it's safe. But there's no chance of us sneezing on each other. So this is the first episode of Throwback Thursday, James.
It is, yeah. And I had quite a clear vision of where I wanted to start with this, actually. I'd hinted at it on previous pods earlier in the week before kind of announcing it on Tuesday that I wanted to have a look at what I describe the forgotten champions, which is Leeds United from 1999 to exist before the Premier League was formed in 1992.
Yeah. And we've had a little bit of a look back at that season. The cynical listeners will think that you picked this season not because of Leeds, but because West Ham finished bottom of the table that year.
Maybe. No, not at all. Not at all.
We'll probably end up speaking about West Ham for no time at all because of the irrelevance of it in that season. But it's interesting. That was obviously when we had 22 teams in the league, right? So
that's right. Well, that didn't come down to 20 until 95, 96, I don't think, when fixture congestion started to become a little bit of an issue. But I think as we'll find out as we look at this journey in 91, 92, fixture congestion was a problem here. And until I looked at it, it wasn't something that I remembered.
No. It's a very different era for football. I think that's why we start looking at it. I'll be honest with you, I wasn't as mad into football when I was 10, 11 years old as perhaps you were because you've been going a few years younger. Although actually you are a few years younger than me. So what was your first season to get at White Hart Lane?
The year before, 1991.
So you were tiny at the time, but you still got a lot of memories of this season.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I suffered bad. You talk about West Ham finishing bottom. A look at the league table, and I couldn't believe, looking back, nobody lost more home games in that season than Tottenham.
Wow. Incredible.
Shite, mate. There was a lot more disparity between what home and away teams did then. Like Oldham Athletic, I think, they finished about 17th, 18th. They were the second highest scorers in home games.
Really? Yes. I've got the table in front of me.
Just a note on Oldham Athletic, if we're digging out London clubs while we're here. Oldham Athletics' average attendance was around about 15,000 during that season. It was only 2,000 less than historical giants Chelsea, who had an average attendance that season of around about 17,000.
Wow, incredible.
But even some of the higher ranking sides, I think Spurs with 6th highest average attendance was only about 27,000.
Okay.
It was only really United, Liverpool, Arsenal at certain stages, and Sheffield Wednesday actually, who had quite high numbers in average attendance. Football was beginning to reboom. These sound like low numbers, but following Italia 90, there was actually a rise back in attendances across the Premier League. And obviously as clubs were converting towards all-seater stadiums, and that went on and on as obviously we got into the era of the Premier League.
Yeah, for sure. So I did have to watch a few good old YouTube videos to remind myself of some of the players. It felt to me like that season was a breakout season, like a lot of young players who then went on to really, really good stellar careers were emerging at that time. Names that popped up making their debuts or very early, the likes of Steve McManaman, Ryan Giggs, Andy Cole, Dwight York were all coming through at that time, and they all went on to be incredible players.
Yeah, Ryan Giggs especially stands out. If you go and look back for videos from that season, the ability of Ryan Giggs, I think, because of his longevity and how long Ryan Giggs survived at the top level for Manchester United, you kind of can forget what he was when he burst on the scene, which was an absolutely frightening direct winger who used to run at you and with loads of skill. this guy was playing regularly for United when he was like 17.
17 years old, man. Incredible.
And he was one of the stars of that team. He
Mm.
wasn't just someone who was making up the numbers. He was one of the best players in that team in 91, 92. He walked away with Young Player of the Year. There was other good young players, if you take from the title side, we'll talk about from Leeds. David Batty had obviously come through the development there. So too had Gary Speed.
Mm.
And there were a number of good young players knocking about. And some obviously experienced old heads as well. It was Gary Lineker, who won the Football Writers Player of the Year. I mean, he scored 35 goals in all competitions in a poor Tottenham team. It was his last year before he bowed out. Obviously, people remember or may remember, unlike me, obviously, Euro 92, he failed to score to break the record for England and then went to Japan from there.
Yep. So tell me why you think that this Leeds team are what you've called forgotten champions.
Well, I just think it is. There's so many of even like our younger viewers, and feeding back from the quiz we did yesterday, a lot of the correct answers people got was like, oh, I remember that from Premier League years, where you've seen it over and over so many times. And that 91, 92 was obviously the last year before. And if you think earlier, go to 90 and 91, obviously there were things that happened in that season that kind of pricked people's memories. Obviously, Arsenal only lost one game and had a great season. Manchester United won the Cup Winners' Cup. And obviously 1990 was the last year of Liverpool's domination. And then further back from that, you remember probably the 80s was more on Match of the Day and that. In 91, 92, obviously ITV had the football coverage as well. You used to get like probably 10 live games a season on a Sunday. That was all we really have the highlights on a Sunday as well. So there was no Match of the Day as such from the BBC. So I think that's another reason why those couple of years, and particularly that one, gets forgotten. And also what happened to Leeds afterwards. If you think of, when people think of, say, the Arsenal 91 team, people then remember after, okay, yeah, they won 2 cups in 93. They won the Cup Winners' Cup in 94. For Leeds, this was a standalone moment, basically. They'd been a Division 2 side only a couple of years earlier. They'd come up and finished 4th in 1991, then won the league. But during this campaign, when they went top for the first time, it was the first time they'd been top of the league at any stage since the early 70s. And then didn't do anything for a while afterwards. Even the great team that had all those kids come through in the late 90s and obviously got to the Champions League semi-finals in, I think it was 2001, it didn't win anything. There was actually comparisons with, I think Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher were making it recently on a program did on Sky, which I haven't seen, but they were comparing kind of what Spurs have done recently very much to that Leeds United team in the essence that it was a great side, but it didn't win anything.
If you
it's only those that watched it that remember it.
Yeah, I have good memories of that Leeds team actually, because they marching their way through the Champions League unexpectedly, and there were a lot of good players in that team as well. I used to like Alan Smith, Bowyer, Marmite kind of character potentially, but they had a lot of good young players at the time as well coming through. But when I looked back at some of these YouTube clips, and I remember that 91-92 team. Because of the likes of Strachan and McAllister and all of these guys, they were iconic at the time. They were a very, very, very good team.
The Leeds sides that won that league was very much built off an absolutely brilliant midfield four of a Gordon Strachan, who was very late in his career.
Yeah.
Who'd come from Manchester United in an interview that I saw, that when he went to Leeds, because he actually went down to the second division with Leeds when they got promoted, he actually realised that there was such a rivalry between Leeds and Manchester United because they hadn't played each other. And obviously United's local rivals were City or Liverpool, for example. Gary Speed and Batty, who I mentioned, obviously came through the ranks. Batty was a very competitive, proper sitting, holding midfield player who did the simple things and the ugly very well. And Gary Speed, a little bit like Ryan Giggs, was a player who could play in a multitude of positions and did so for Leeds during his career there before going to Everton. But during that season was predominantly an attacking left winger. And Gary McAllister, who people may remember better for being part of the Liverpool Cup winning treble team in 2001, was an extremely good midfielder who they'd gotten the cheap after a very good few successful years coming through at Leicester following a move down from Motherwell. That was a top midfield because it had a little bit of everything.
Correct.
And they were fortunate that they went through that season and that midfield four stayed fit. Was imperative.
Yep.
The rest
in goal. John Lukic in goal.
Yeah, John Lukic was a keeper who did well. Very interestingly, Arsenal fans were quite upset when they let him go back to Leeds because he started his career at Leeds. Actually went to Arsenal, to Leeds, and then finished back up at Arsenal again. Arsenal fans were quite unhappy when George Graham bought David Seaman. There's a great quote from Graham when he let Lukic go, saying, "I still believe Lukic is one of the best goalkeepers in the country, but I believe David Seaman is the best." And you could argue, obviously, what David Seaman then went on to do with Arsenal. It was obviously very justified to make that move. The quality player in the back four was left back Tony Dorigo, who was actually, he ended up playing about 15 times for England at left back. He was another one. He had Stuart Pearce in his way. Otherwise, I think he would have played more. He was an exceptional left back. But he was Australian, which a lot of people might not know. And actually, when he was at Villa earlier in his career, Australia obviously wanted him to go and play for them, and Villa wouldn't let him go. And the same then happened when Dorigo went to Chelsea. The argument being that Australia were playing such weak opposition in the Oceania qualifiers and weren't qualifying for World Cups. There was little point. Right back, Mel Sterland was someone who used to take the penalties for him and was very good in his younger years. And the centre-backs was an interesting partnership because essentially they'd both been rejected by North London clubs to a certain extent. Chris Fairclough was a decent player who'd had spells at Forest and then suffered injuries at Tottenham before going back to Leeds. And Chris White had been at Arsenal and done okay, but then when you think of that Arsenal back four that famously developed, that's why he ended up moving on as well. And the front two was a sprinkling of what you so commonly saw in forward lines then was a little and large combination. Lee Chapman finished the season as top goal scorer with 16 goals, never got a cap for England. But even in that season, 16 goals may not sound like a lot, but I think it was joint third highest. Gary Lineker got 28 league goals and Ian Wright got 29, and then it was a long drop off to the rest. And his partner that season was Rod Wallace, who I remember scored the goal of the season in 93-94 with a mazy run against a pathetic Tottenham in that season. And Rod Wallace had been bought from Southampton, and they really played off each other well. Chapman had his outstanding season for Leeds. He was so good in the air. And that was helped by the fact that in both wide areas, be it Dorigo and Speed from the left and Mo Sterland and Strachan from the right, they had great delivery. Set pieces were great from Gary McAllister as well. So they played to his strengths, and Wallace did all the donkey work off that. He was quick. He was very direct.
It's interesting. You mentioned Wallace, the two centre-backs, the right-back Sterling. Couldn't remember Toffee, but the rest of the team rolls off the tongue very easily. Lukic, Dorigo, the midfield especially, and Lee Chapman, definitely.
Yeah, the people of our age and older will certainly remember that midfield. That was very good. That midfield four would survive at the top of the Premier League now. The rest of the team, not so much. But that midfield four, he just had everything from the ball winner and Batty, the playmaking of McAllister, the energy of Strachan, even at that age. Gary Speed brought the youthfulness, and he was very good in the air as well, even at a young age. Obviously, Gary Speed very tragically lost his life 20-odd years later. But people will remember him probably more as a combative midfielder at Everton, Newcastle, and at Bolton Wanderers as well. It's not how he started out his career. He was very much an attacking winger. Yeah.
But a multi-talented player for sure.
Yeah, and they had a manager who got the best out of them. As I said, a lot of these players came up from Division 2 into that Division 1. There's actually, I'm not saying it's anywhere near the achievement, but you can make comparisons with what that Leeds side did with what Leicester did, in the essence that they came up and then won the league in the second season. You could argue that Blackburn Rovers a few years later went on to do similar, but obviously Blackburn came straight up and were breaking British transfer records for the likes of Alan Shearer. Whereas this Leeds side weren't doing it. A lot of that side was either unproven in the likes of Gary McAllister Rod Wallace, who'd done very well in the front three with Alan Shearer and Matt Letizia at Southampton, or players who had been rejected to some sort of instance in the likes of, say, Lukic, Chris White and Fairclough.
Yeah. They won the league in the end by 4 points, and then we're 7 points clear of Sheffield Wednesday in third place. So it really was a Leeds versus Manchester United battle for the title. Arsenal faded away into fourth in the end from winning the league the previous year, right?
Arsenal had an awful start. As I said earlier, they only lost one game in 1991. But after the first 3 games of 91-92, they only had 1 point. They'd got a late draw at home to QPR and had already lost at Aston Villa and Everton, both by scores of 3-1. Liverpool were in a big transition, which was Graham Souness's first full season. They suffered badly with injuries, particularly to John Barnes and Ronnie Whelan during that season, and were well off the pace, but did go on to win the FA Cup. Forest had a good young side, as proven by the fact they got to the League Cup final where they lost them at Manchester United. But a lot of their talents got obviously taken up in the years preceding. Obviously, they got relegated in 92-93. Sheffield Wednesday had a great season. Going into the final 2 games, mathematically, they could still win the title until they drew at Selhurst Park in what would have been match day 41, I guess. But they were never really in the title race. They were never top at any time, never really within sort of a game's reach of Leeds and Manchester United, who pulled away very early. Manchester United started like a train, didn't concede until the 5th game in a 1-1 draw, actually, with Leeds. And it looked like they were going to go through the season. They would have been massive odds on at one stage. And one of the key turning points really came when Leeds and Manchester United played each other 3 times inside 2 weeks, all at Ellen Road. And United won an FA Cup 3rd round tie. They also won a League Cup quarter final. And the league game was drawn 1-1. And from there, you've kind of thought that Leeds, confidence-wise, having played them at home 3 times against their main rivals and not won, might have fallen away. But then very randomly, a game that some of the older listeners might remember, a game happened on New Year's Day, which was televised, and QPR went to Old Trafford, and Dennis Bailey scored a hat-trick in a 4-1 win for QPR. And United then suffered large periods of draws. I think they had a period of 7 games where they were undefeated, but they had 5 draws. And the opposition in a lot of them were bottom half sides that should have been beaten, like a poor Chelsea side they drew at home. Notts County away, I think they drew 0-0 and got relegated. I think they might have drawn at Luton as well. Bad periods of this. It's interesting looking back at the final league table, just how many draws there were in that season. Leeds lost only 4 times, but I think they only won 22. Now, if we were aiming for a top 4 finish now in a 38-game season, you'd be looking at 22 wins would get you to sort of 4th. 22 in a 42-game season there was enough to win that league. There were so many drawn games. And where United began to kind of stumble, Leeds weren't, I would say, ruthless, because they had results as well, but had an uplift. And one of the things that obviously uplifted them was the signing of Eric Cantona, who was on trial at Sheffield Wednesday. And Trevor Francis ummed and ahed about it, and Leeds paid the money to Nimes, I think it was, in France, to
get him on loan initially.
To get him in. And his impact wasn't that great, in the sense that he only scored 3 times, and they were all in games at Ellen Road in what were comfortable victories. Although, do go and have a YouTube a look at a goal he scored for Leeds against Chelsea, which is an absolute worldie. But what it did do was it gave the supporters looking into it, and sort of fan comments going back to the season, was Leeds had a big uplift. There was a positivity that, like, this extra body, because that 11 was so set, they could bring Cantona on into games, and he would have an impact with obviously the mercurial talent that he had, and obviously within a year he was playing for Manchester United, and Leeds kind of went in the opposite direction from there. But it was just, it gave them a lift, and United didn't. There were things that were happening at United, like they lost an FA. I remember staying up late to watch highlights of an FA Cup fourth round replay with Southampton, which they lost on penalties at Old Trafford. Some people might remember Ryan Giggs doing kick-ups on the way to the penalty spot before missing the key penalty. I've never seen anyone do it since, I don't think.
Yeah.
But absolutely slated for it. And they were just having the odd bad result when really, with respect to Leeds, United were the better side all round. You think of them at centre-half. Obviously, they bought Peter Schmeichel that summer. Bruce and Pallister at centre-half. Dennis Irwin was a great left-back. They bought Paul Parker from right-back. Midfield of an emerging Paul Ince and a very experienced Brian Robson. Then you had the likes of Ryan Giggs. Lee Sharp was a great talent, but kind of goes missing in people's memories because of how good Giggs was. Then you had like Mark Hughes up front. Brian McClare had his in all comps. United had the better side, really, but Leeds just kept plugging away. Leeds, as I said, did have bad results. I think they lost in April. They lost 4-0 at Man City, and they also lost 4-1 at Queen's Park Rangers. But they weren't drawing as many games in a run-in as Manchester United were.
It's the more you talk about it, the more it is very similar to Leicester's win, isn't it? It's where who can hold their nerve for the longest whilst everything is going to pot around them. And that's what happened in the year that Leicester won the Premier League in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, what was remarkable about that Leicester team, obviously, was the amount of games it was winning, say, 1-0. And they didn't get beat. I always go back to that game that Leicester lost at Arsenal on Valentine's Day. And walking away from that Spurs one later at Man City on the same day, who were the 4 teams in the running at that time, and being convinced that Arsenal would go on and win it from there. Leicester didn't lose again.
Yeah.
So that run of just kept feeling like they was winning 1-0 every single week.
Relentless they were.
And, you know, even like when they had the blip, when they nearly lost at home to yourselves, when Jamie Vardy got sent off, you know, they scraped a draw at the end just to keep that feel-good morale feeling going. When Leeds had bad results, they did recover well. That's what
in that season.
Very well.
And then it broke up, and then came the Premier League.
Indeed, it did, and football became a different game. But just before we move on from the season, one of the things I wanted to highlight was the fixture congestion that Manchester United faced. Because in the run-up to
I saw Dean Saunders moaning about it. It was like we were playing 3 or 4 times a week some occasions.
Well, Dean Saunders was at Liverpool at the time, so I don't think it would have been Dean Saunders. But
I think he was moaning just about the congestion.
He may well have been.
I mean, Brian Robson. I might be mixing the two up.
Quite probably, yeah. They lost essentially in the run-in 3 games in a row, United. Now, I just want to tell you this because I didn't realise this. But on the 12th of April, which would have been a Sunday, they beat Nottingham Forest 1-0 in the League Cup final. And that's a lot later than what it is now. It's normally late February, very early March, the League Cup final.
Yeah, that's a lot later.
4 days later, they played Southampton at home in the league and won 1-0. 2 days later, which I assume was Easter Saturday.
That's a Saturday, yeah.
Yeah. So Sunday, Thursday, now Saturday, 2 days later, they drew 1-1 at Luton.
Okay.
Then on the Monday, which I presume was Easter Monday, they lost 2-1 at home to Nottingham Forest. Then on the Wednesday, they lost 1-0 at West Ham, bottom of the league, West Ham.
Yeah.
And then on the Sunday, they lost 2-0 at Liverpool, which with Leeds having won 3-2 at Sheffield United early in the day, with a scene of the goals scored in that Leeds win at Sheffield United was something out of a Sunday league match, mate. Comical. So we actually Thursday, Saturday, Monday, Wednesday picked up 4 points, and then obviously lost to Liverpool after that as well. Which and it's interesting looking back in Sir Alex Ferguson's autobiography. He never moaned about it. Could you imagine going 10 years later? He couldn't have moaned about it. But he was quite praising of the fact, maybe because United hadn't won it at that stage.
Just to be in competitions.
He was quite praising of the relentlessness of Leeds to recover from bad results and keep going again. Yeah, imagine that in the running now. And do you know what's laughable about that? All those fixtures. So
6 games in 14 days. That's 2.3.
It's not even just that, is it? Thursday, Sunday, Monday, Wednesday. What is that? It's astonishing. Yeah. It's 4 games in 6 days, mate. And then obviously a 4-day break to play in Liverpool on the Sunday. Before the final game of the season, where they beat Tottenham 3-1, they didn't play in the midweek. What about? They weren't in Europe or anything. Why wasn't one of those games in that midweek between games 41 and 42? Bizarre.
That was an era, James, where men were men, you know. Didn't moan about fixture congestion and getting there.
Yeah, I get that. And
just got on with it, tight shorts, and ran around the pitch.
Sure, United probably shorts. My God, yeah, astonishing. I don't know if United rotated too much during those games. I mean, you didn't have squads like a club like Manchester United would have now, for example. So there probably wasn't too much. But it certainly helped Leeds that they didn't have that schedule. You know, Leeds won the league by 4 points. In those games where Manchester United played 4 times in 6 days, they took 4 points. All they needed was 2 points per game. I think they might have, I can't recall, they might have even had, that would have put them level anyway, whether they had a better certainly would have had them in with a better shout.
Yeah, but they put a bit more pressure on Leeds as well at the time.
Well, then as well, they had to go to Anfield and win, for example, whereas they might have been going to Anfield in a position where a draw might have kept them top, right, for example. So things might have played out very differently.
And an interesting time. And then obviously Leeds didn't do much for a while afterwards, really.
Well, they were one of the worst teams to ever defend the title, basically. They finished 17th the following season, which, as we said, was obviously in a 22-team league. Astonishingly, they didn't win.
It must be that is the worst post-title result for a club, surely.
No, it's not. Actually,
is it not?
No, I don't think so. I think not Blackburn and not Leicester either. But it's not the worst. It's not the worst ever. Probably in the last 30, 40 years, it probably is. They didn't win a single away game, Suj. Not one.
Because Chelsea, a couple of years ago, obviously had a horrid season after winning the title as well, but they still recovered to, was it 12th in the end, I think they were? Something around that.
Yeah, and Chelsea only lost about one game in the second half of that season. Which
they did recover.
Hiddink had come in. I remember in 91-92, we played Leeds late in the season at home, 3-1. They scored twice late, but they well deserved to win. And I remember being little and Dad saying, like, you know, they'll win the league from here and that. And we played them about 11 months later when they were obviously couldn't win for Toffee away from. We beat them 4-0 at home. We should have got 6 or 7, mate. And it was basically this. It was basically Teddy Sheringham got a hat-trick, but it was basically the same team that they had. And they did recover, in fairness, from there. I think they had three fifth-place finishes in a row. And then they had a bad season. They started 96-97 badly, which included a 4-0 defeat at home to a Manchester United team inspired by Karol Poborski, actually. And then Howard Wilkinson was gone.
I remember him.
And George Graham was in. And Wilkinson, interestingly, despite obviously that really good sustained long spell at Leeds, he had a caretaker positions for England. But his only notable managerial stint after that was at Sunderland. I think he's still involved with some of the technical stuff with the FA, but it was strange that following that say, unlike say with Graham, who got the Leeds job following the fallout at Arsenal, that Wilkinson didn't get anything following Leeds. Maybe he didn't want it. I don't know.
Yeah, very interesting. Interesting time. I did have a bit of memory from that time, mainly because you were sponsored by Holston Pills at the time, right?
Yeah, Spurs were for all of the 90s.
Yeah, and am I right in thinking, was Ian Walker in goal for you at the time?
Yeah, for the majority of that, yeah.
And the only reason I remember is in 1991, I started at a new school, which happens to be the same school where my boys go now randomly. And I remember, I'll never forget, I wasn't that into football, but obviously boys being boys, 10, 11 years old, we're all into football. The goalkeeper we had in our school team at the time, a guy called Robbie Walker, he was all right, he was a good goalkeeper, but he was a Spurs fan. So I always remember he used to have his Spurs Holston goalkeeping jersey, and it was like yellow it was a ridiculous, looked like someone had vomited over it, having just eaten a packet of Skittles, if you remember.
Yeah, Suj has definitely given the game away to the fact that he never watched Suj James on Tuesday, because I actually spoke about these goalkeeping.
Oh, really?
On that stream. Believe it or not, I was trying to recall a Spurs goalkeeper that I couldn't remember, Kevin Dearden, who made one Spurs.
Okay. Did he wear that horrible shirt as well?
Yeah, our friend Rob Pickard sent in a question asking me for all the Spurs goalkeepers since I've been going. And I just couldn't remember getting. But Eric Torsfit and Ian Walker during those, it was a blue kit and a yellow kit, which was kind of like orange. And it had weird stuff coming up.
All over it.
Kind of what you described better than me.
Yeah.
Well,
I remember that was the time Tim Flowers was in goal for Blackburn at the time, right? If I remember.
Tim Flowers was, again, he was one of those that Blackburn spent big money on to get from Southampton.
I remember having conversations with Robbie at the time, because I think it was Chris Wood in goal for England at the time, right?
Chris Woods in that season, going into Euro 92, and then David Seaman took over.
He used to always have a debate. He used to always tell me that he used to think that Tim Flowers was a better goalkeeper than Chris Woods at the time. And it's weird. It's one of those conversations that I've never forgotten back then, because unanimous kind of consensus was that Chris Woods was the best goalkeeper for England. And I'd never heard of Tim Flowers, but I remember Robbie telling me that he thought Tim Flowers was the better goalkeeper. And, you know, he was a school team goalkeeper. So at 11 years old, you trust him, didn't you?
Well, England were blessed with decent goalkeepers in the 90s.
Really
with Seaman, Chris Woods in the early 90s, Tim Flowers, Nigel Martin.
Yeah.
We'd probably have any of them in goal now if we were honest.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think we've got some decent goalkeepers now. What seems to happen is they show promise and then fade away. The likes of, I suppose Joe Hart's career faded away a little later, but Fraser Forster was supposed to be a great goalkeeper. Whatever happened to Chris Kirkland was supposed to be a great goalkeeper. Jury's out. But that's why I worry about Dean Henderson as well. Like, he's a good goalkeeper and he's got the potential to be a really good goalkeeper. But we've seen so many come and go and fade away so quickly, and I'm not sure why that is really with goalkeepers nowadays.
I think one of the reasons, just to touch on that, is I think it's because the position has developed so much. And we talk about people like Schmeichel and David Seaman as being like Premier League greats and that. I mean, Schmeichel wasn't a great kicker of a ball. He would have really struggled with attacking opposition players coming to press at him now and playing out from the back and trying to sort of play chip balls into the fullbacks and stuff. We remember him as a great goalkeeper.
He never used to kick it. He'd just lob it. Because he used to play handball, didn't he, Schmeich? So he could
throw it some,
as far as most of us could kick that bloody thing. So I always remember him from a distribution point of view, just having the ball and just lobbing it down the wing at whoever was there, Sharp or Giggs. So I think he'd get away with it just because he could throw a ball so far.
I think there's so much more demand on goalkeepers now in terms of their distribution. It will be interesting to see. I mean, it looks at the moment like Dean Henderson will potentially go back on loan to Sheffield United again next year. I don't know.
Wow.
Is the sort of goalkeeper I'd like to see Spurs be interested in, obviously. But it will be interesting to see, although they do as a team obviously play out at Sheffield United, and once the ball's in play, want to play. Henderson will normally go quite direct with his kicking. It will be interesting to see if further down the line in his career, if that's influenced. If you think of Pickford's got a massive launch on him, but with one of his good facets is his distribution is very good with his feet in terms of his short passing, his quickness, be it from hands or feet. It will be interesting to see if Henderson develops further down the line and whether you forget the basics of being what a good goalkeeper should be. Because at the moment, it's the same with Henderson. We think, good goalkeeper, good shot stopper. We don't really know yet, distribution-wise. And that's why I say Pickford is probably still just about England's first choice. I don't know how we got onto this conversation, mate.
We were talking about goalkeepers at the time from 1991 being Ian Walker with his slick back hair. But there we go. That's a kind of little rundown on the 91-92 season pre-Premier League. We've got one show left this week, James. Content's still been going out of people. I asked you off air before we started, but it's an opportunity to give it a little plug as well. Yesterday we did the 1991 season quiz. 0102 season quiz in line with the Champ Manager game that's coming out next week or launching on Saturday. So make sure you follow James on Twitter to get updates on where you can enter that. This is Champman0102 on Twitter, right?
It's Fantasy Champ Man, I think it is.
Yeah.
Is the Twitter account.
Have a look at that. I did horrendously, 0.5 point out of 20. How did the general public do? Just badly?
Okay, right. In admit the quiz was probably harder than I thought it was. I'm not seeing when you know the answers. I've seen a couple of sort of 15, 16, 17s bouncing about. It seems the majority of people with their answers. Maybe it was tougher than I thought it was.
Well, we'll have another quiz next week where we might make it a little bit easier and give people a chance to get some decent scores in for that. So there we go.
Nah, it's all about the tough quiz, mate. You don't want everyone getting 20 out of 20.
Tomorrow we got a final show of the week coming at you, the People's Poll, a bit later in the week than usual, but we're going to be talking about finances in football and non-league clubs, especially with this coronavirus lockdown and lack of sport, and looking in a little bit more detail at Barnet and what have you. So yeah, we've got that final show coming this week. Anything else to add, James?
No, just one thing on the Division 1 table to show you how desperate it was for some clubs who never got a look in at the Premier League. The two teams that went down with West Ham that season, Luton Town, both of those clubs in the years since had obviously ended up in the conference. Luton Town since recovered, so obviously being in the Championship, are one of those clubs in the National League. They are the oldest club professionally in football, to my knowledge, and they are in the National League at the moment. Luton and Notts County were two of those clubs who never got any of the riches
from the Premier League.
Obviously, one of the clubs that did stay around for a while was Oldham Athletic, essentially.
Yeah, interesting. Have a look on Wikipedia. You can go back to the 91-92 table, and it does make some interesting reading. 13 out of those 22 clubs are still in the top flight. 9 have disappeared to wherever they are now in various positions throughout the Football League. So there we go. So do stay tuned to hit the like and subscribe and notification bell. I know it's a horrible quiet time, so please make sure you're staying safe if you're observing safe distancing and all that kind of stuff, as we are. And we'll be back at you tomorrow with more content. Ciao for now.
Be nice to each other. Cue music, man, child.
Indeed.